Thank you very much. So we indeed had a very exciting workshop yesterday. Very well attended, a lot of participation. It was very exciting. We were very pleased with how everything went. And one of the things that we talked about at the meeting yesterday were two big questions associated with wireless health. And the first one, what value does wireless health promise? And this is the question that all of us feel very happy about the answers. We feel like there's tremendous promise, improving care, enhancing personal wellness, aging in place, reducing health care costs, things along those lines. Obviously, all of us are here because we see the value. A little bit of a tougher question that we're all currently struggling with is how this value can be demonstrated. And in some aspects, our community is doing this very well. We each individually have our own platforms. We're collecting data. We're targeting applications. And we're making good progress individually in our sort of siloed projects. But there's going to be a limitation to that, and if you think about how it is that we as an entire field can move forward, and how it is that we can build off of the progress of each of our individual projects, that there's really an opportunity for all of us to move forward and all of us to benefit from that, while still dealing with intellectual property issues and all those other kinds of things. And so one of the things that we're looking at as a way of facilitating that type of collaboration and interaction and entire community moving forward is through sharing data. And so we'd like to be able to share data among researchers, and ultimately, as these become part of the normal healthcare infrastructure, sharing them among clinicians and caretakers, patients, family members, things along those lines. And thinking about what we're able to do on the research side, we all put a significant amount of effort into collecting this data. It takes time, it takes resources, it takes patience, as we often call them, to bear with us as we're doing this research. So we'd like to be able to reuse that. So the data that I collect can be used by someone else maybe for data mining purposes, or achieving some statistical significance that we aren't able to achieve individually because of the small scale of some of our studies. There's a strong desire that we can enable some apples-to-apples comparisons across our work. A lot of us are working on similar types of problems. Well, how can I compare the quality of my solution to the quality of your solution if we're doing it on totally different data that was collected with different platforms, with different data collection protocols? And so if we can share that to a certain extent, then that could be a big step forward. And then, thinking about how it is that we can collaborate across institutions. I mean, some of these studies that people are talking about are very large-scale, cross-institutional boundaries, across large geographic ranges. So being able to effectively use some type of data management for our trials that we're undergoing. Now, one of the great things about this is that a lot of work has been done in data sharing over the years in a lot of different areas, in speech, in various types of imaging. We had a great presentation at the workshop yesterday of looking at effective data sharing with EEG. So we really want to be able to leverage a lot of the expertise that's been developed in those areas over the years. However, there's not going to be a direct mapping of those kinds of solutions to a shared database for wireless health. And part of the reason for that is that because of these research silos that we have, is that each of us we have our own platforms, and they're configured in our own particular way and operate in different modes. There are different data collection protocols, file formats, all these kinds of things. And it makes it so that it's very difficult to put it all together. So for something like EEG, there's a standard way that we collect EEG data. So, and that really isn't established yet in our field. We're all still kind of doing it the same way with our own sensors. And so as a result, then there's also this need for some metadata for all of these issues above. So if we all have our own things, and that's a good thing in some respect, it inspires innovation that if we're not all locked into a standard platform or a standard data collection protocol, but there does seem to be some need for some standardization of the metadata. So I can describe my platform, I can describe the way I collected data in a way that makes it possible for you to use the data that I collected. And so part of the nature of this evolving field that we're all a part of is that, the actual links between the platforms, protocols, applications, and outcomes is still evolving. When we collect data, sometimes we don't know exactly what we're going to do with it. And that makes the notion of sharing a little bit more difficult as well. And then, of course, thinking about some of the standard database issues of dealing with scalability, searchability, mining, all these kinds of things become important. And then, of course, if we're starting to talk about sharing, looking at a lot of the privacy issues as well, which we can talk about. So we put together this workshop yesterday, which was very exciting. And one of the goals that we had in putting this together was that we wanted to enable sort of this omnidirectional flow of information. Roozbeh and I don't think we have all the answers in this area. And there were 70 really, really bright people who joined us. And they all had their own ideas. And we wanted to make sure they had an opportunity to be heard. So we had a few expert presentations. But then we had breakout sessions on a variety of topics, which was a lot of fun and very enlightening. We also, wanted to start tapping into some of the expertise that's out there in terms of bioinformatics and see how that can be applied to wireless health. Also wanted to learn about the needs of the community. What kind of data sharing do you want to do? What are the issues that you see moving forward? And ultimately, we're going to be forming a working group to start looking at these issues going forward. We didn't want to just have the workshop and that be the end of it. So I mentioned that we had these breakouts and we had 4 different topics, and we're going to talk about the outcomes of 2 of those. I'm going to pass things over to Roozbeh to talk about the first, and time permitting, I'll talk about the privacy.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you so much, John. How do I work with this? This is a forward, right? Forward. Okay, sounds good. So we had 4 breakout sessions. The first one was on data collection protocols, metadata, and trial management, privacy, data mining, and data reuse for new studies and data validation. So in the interest of time, we are going to talk about the first 2 only. The first one was, basically the problem was, the position statement was, we would like to design an experimental protocol, right? We want to make sure that the error, so a lot of times when we design an experimental protocol, especially in the field of wireless health, there are a chain of individuals involved, right? You have the compliance of the user, you have the performance of the research coordinator or the data collector. Often we have a technician who would clean up the data. Then we have researchers who would do preliminary analysis on the data, and essentially they would make them available to the researchers, to the clinical researchers, and they can build their signal processing techniques to extract clinically relevant information. So the first question was how we can build this such that the error in the chain would be minimized, and then we can reuse the data for various studies. John and I, we have 2 different platforms. They are supposed to do the exact same thing, but we are using different types of sensors. Not different types of sensors, actually. Sensors manufactured by different companies. And we started sharing our data, and we ran into many, many problems, right? The spec of the sensor, the placement of the sensor, even how we connect it to the body was one of the issues, and it generated a lot of inconsistencies. So, these are, so I'm just the voice of the breakout session. These were some of the comments that came out. The very first issue was access to digital data. It's often hard and it's cumbersome due to all the limitations of IRB. A lot of times the data is in a very primitive format. I'm given a whole bunch of accelerometer and gyroscope readings, and now I have to deal with it. What am I supposed to do with it, right? The personal reports and diaries are often missing. And there is no ground truth. The data is not annotated. So you're looking at some walking experiment, right? I need to know how well that walking experiment was performed. I need to know about the, the environment. Is this, was this concrete, the floor was concrete or it was a carpet? And then there is a lack of uniform format for data and annotation and the metadata. So annotation and metadata, essentially these are labels for data. You have walking experiments, you have all these raw sensor readings. You would like to label it, right? You would say, this is walking, and that's what we refer to as annotation. Okay, so. All right, so the very first question that was raised by the participants in the breakout session was, what would be the proper abstraction level for annotation? How much is enough? How much details do we need to include in the annotation? Let's say, again, you're looking at walking data, right? Could we just specify that with walking? Should we include the speed of the walking? Should we include the weight of the person? Or maybe we should include, for example, the stride length, gait variability, all the other cadence, all the other measures. The second question was, how do we represent the data in a comprehensible manner to the customers? A lot of times you have to work with end users, and you would want to provide that data initially to them. The third question, which was pretty interesting, was, does this wireless health data resemble text databases or image databases? So one very successful example of a database is a text database, right? If you go on Google, if you look for a specific keyword, if there would be a computer somewhere in the world, in Taiwan, that is connected to the computer, that is connected to the network, and it has that particular document that you're looking for, there is a good chance that you can find it. But if you go on Google and you start looking for example, all images that describe 200 people in the room, good luck, right? That was an example of an unsuccessful database approach. Does wireless health database resemble text or image databases? Should we generate frameless databases, or we should start working based on a well-designed framework? That's really what we do in our university, right? A lot of times when we start an application, a case study, a clinical study, we start building the database from scratch. The database is frameless, and essentially it becomes we generate frame for that. But in this example, should we start with a predefined frame, or we should start with a frameless approach? All right, so did I go out of order, or this is? Yes, that's good. Okay, so a couple of suggestions that came up. The first one was basically we would like to create a working group that can, similar to Facebook, that can share, publish their databases, and they would help to evolve the notion of metadata or the annotation. The second suggestion was to build an operating system-like framework for this. So, imagine you have a whole bunch of programs on your computer. The job of the operating system is to provide interoperability. You want to change your laptop with the assumption that your operating system, your Windows, work. If you change your laptop, you don't have to redesign all your programs, right? That was one of the issues that came up, because a lot of times when there is a change in the system, the underlying technology would change for any reason. You would have to go back and redesign all your experiments, because now you're dealing with a new data. There was a need to generate more comprehensive annotation standards, and also enable evolving annotation scheme. What that is based on, so for example, Google is a good example, right? Depending on the queries that Google would receive, it would regenerate its indexing, right? And it would try to make it more efficient. So would it make sense to look at an approach similar to this? And build automated data validation tools, right? I'm given a set of data. How could I isolate the errors? How could I check if the patient compliance was in the picture? How could I check if the research coordinator placed the sensors correctly? John.
Thank you. So I'm just going to very, very quickly go through some of the outcomes of our discussions on privacy. There's sort of this classic issue of providing both privacy and usability in databases, and especially given some of the challenges of this evolving nature of wireless health that I mentioned earlier. And there were two key things that we talked about. One is sort of privacy requirements as defined by FDA, all of our IRBs, HIPAA, things like that. But then there's also this notion of privacy communication. So most of what we're talking about here with healthcare is going to be opt-in. So that means that you need to give the information to the patients themselves about what their risk reward is. So what are the privacy risks associated with this? And they need to be able to make decisions based on that. So how we communicate the risk reward is actually a really interesting issue. And then some of the questions here of security versus privacy for some of these databases, looking at what are the best practices for privacy preservation, and then also best practices for communicating privacy measures. So how can we explain some technical solutions to privacy to some of the users of our system, the actual patients themselves. And then there were some interesting talks too about where is the liability for ensuring privacy lie? If it falls on the cell phone vendors, they might be pretty nervous about that. So looking at what's coming up in what we hope to accomplish in the next few years is continuing to survey what's out there. We do think we can learn a lot from the kinds of work that has been done in this area before, and ultimately starting to look at how we can achieve some of these problems we set out from the beginning. So thank you very much.